Hi, my name is Boledi.
Hi, my name is Buyisile.
Hi, I'm Wikuzo.
Hi, my name is Buyisile, and we are
Tladi Mental Health Associates.
This is our podcast, The Mental Route.
Journey with us as we take psychology beyond the room.
Like romance.
Welcome to The Mental Route. My name is Buyisile Mncina. I am a counselling psychologist as well as a co-founder at Tladi Mental Health Associates, and I will be facilitating today's topic, which is quite an interesting one. And with me, I have Boledi Tladi, who is also part of Tladi Mental Health Associates. I'll give her a chance to introduce herself just before I run through the topic for today. Hi.
Hi Bui, hi good people. My name is Tladi, also a fellow co-founder of Tladi Mental Health Associates, and I'm pretty keen to get into today's topic.
Love it. So today's topic will be around weaponizing therapy in the context of relationships, be it the recommendation of therapy for couples, families, individuals, colleagues, work settings. And perhaps this might sound contradictory because we know therapy to often be framed around personal awareness, empowerment, and insight in order to develop yourself, in order to engage well in the relationships around you. So when we're thinking about weaponizing therapy, it seems like how can we use what is meant to heal, to harm, to coerce, to sway, and to influence others to your own benefit. So let's have this conversation, and I'll just put the question out to you, lady, in terms of your experience as a psychologist and your experience in doing community-oriented work. When it comes to weaponizing psychology or therapy, what comes to mind for you?
I think this is such an interesting topic, Bui, because, it first brings to mind for me the idea that any space can be corrupted to be something it's not always intentioned to be, right? And so it really kind of calls us into an awareness of, in those spaces that are intended for healing, are we actually doing the healing work, or are we occupying the space, seem mostly just to look like we're doing the work, right? And that in itself can be, I guess, what we start to call weaponizing, taking a space that's intended for healing, for awareness, for growth, and manipulating it to be for harm, for coercing, like you say, for a kind of a passive aggressive motion of I'm here, but I'm not actually doing the work. And as a way of avoiding accountability, right? People come to therapy or come to healing for, this is what's gone wrong and this is what we need to do to kind of go back, look into it, account for it. But you can quite easily be in that space without actually doing the real hard emotional work that it requires of you. And that in itself can be painful for, especially in couples therapy, for your partner who might really want to engage in that kind of work. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that come to mind for me when I think about weaponizing therapy, when I think about weaponizing psychology, taking something that's intended for growth and healing, and using those same kinds of aesthetics around growth and healing and the potential for that, and manipulating them to not do that, to stay in place, to hurt under the guise of healing. Yeah.
And I mean, as you're quite, detailing that, I suppose what's coming up for me is that in the process of weaponizing therapy, it's quite complex and very dynamic and multi-layered. So at the individual level, it looks a particular way. External to the individual, it looks a particular way. Systems can weaponize, therapy or health-seeking behavior. And, in terms of other social aspects, so your church, religion, cultural spaces. They can tend to weaponize therapy. Social media, I suppose, is also one of the ways in which I think I cringe when I when I go on social media and people are honestly disregarding the profession and what it stands for. It looks like it's just a conversation where we're talking about how parents and spaces are not conscientized about psychology, but ultimately it's a complete disregard of the work. And it's jabs and jokes and haha and okay, we accumulate the tweets and the retweets, but at the end of the day I sit and I think of the person who's truly trying to negotiate that importance in their family or that importance in their relationship. And as you were trying to convince your partner to take up therapy, they happened to see that thread and they were just like, nah, actually, you know what, this is not necessarily something that's worthwhile for us to take up at this point.
I have to ask you for some examples, Buyi. Like I think we all see it in our everyday lives, but what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
So when it comes to weaponizing therapy, I think the most common that we find would be framed around an ultimatum. You have to go, we have to go, otherwise we might be exploring, the ending of either a job contract or the ending of a relationship. So it just becomes that's how we see it come up quite a bit. Even when we have inquiries around, therapy, I often say it's important to, especially third-party inquiries. It's important for us as psychologists to say we need the consent and the buy-in of the person that you're recommending therapy for. And then when you kind of listen out and have a conversation with that person, you can tell that it's one of those, if you don't do this, then there is a consequence. So that's the first part in terms of how we start to see the weaponizing of psychological intervention.
I think you bring up a really good point that maybe centers all of what we're speaking on, right? And what causes people to weaponize therapy is that lack of buy-in, right? That kind of, I've been forced to be here by circumstance. And then that for the therapist and sometimes for the partner, if it's a kind of a couples therapy, the first part of that work, of that therapy, is kind of getting the buy-in of the resistant person in this dynamic. Even if it's someone who's, say, sent by work because of something that may have taken place, they may take the opportunity to go to therapy, not because they think they have issues to work through, but because they don't want to lose their job. And so a lot of kind of the first steps of that kind of starting that process of therapy is always about how do you show this person, or not even show them, but help them realize that this is a beneficial space for them, even if they didn't come for the initial intention that they were referred for.
And I mean, as you speak on that, right, the one thing that starts to come up for me, and I mean we'll get into this shortly, is just the kind of personality and character kind of, personality disorders in one, but also character in another for people. And I suppose, when it comes to who is expressive and who is not, who tends to lead and who doesn't, and also the sense of being emotionally aware. I think one of the things that's quite interesting is, interacting with individuals who'll be like, I consider myself to be emotionally self-aware, and it's like, okay,
What does that mean?
In one part you have to have the internal awareness, but in another part you rely so much on other people being able to also give you feedback. Otherwise you become resistant, and that's what we'll be talking about, to say when it comes to empowerment and change and that kind of intersecting of personalities, how do we kind of separate those and see how it works. In your experience in the space, when it comes to self-awareness, how do people frame it? when they're coming through?
That's such an interesting question. I find that so usually people's idea of self-awareness is very mental, right? It's very, by mental I mean also descriptive of like, this is the kind of person I am, this is how people have told me who I am. Very rarely is it emotional. People don't know themselves as emotional people, so they'll describe themselves in terms of their work, in terms of some of the ways they've learned to deal with different situations. So I think a great example of this is the kind of Twitter prescriptions of what a good relationship is, what a good partner is, what a bare minimum is, and all of that, and people kind of taking that on as personality traits, and thinking of that as self-awareness, but not really doing the work to kind of go within, figure out who am I outside of other people's voices and opinions. Who am I as a partner? Who am I as a person? What actually feeds me emotionally? Don't even get me started on spiritually.
Of course, yeah.
And how can I become okay with that, without being too concerned about, does it feel good for other people when I embody this way of being? So I find it's always very surface level, very on the edge, but rarely do you come across a client that has a practice of deep diving into themselves, and saying, even if things look this way, emotionally I know that it's good for me because it feels this way.
And I mean, as you're kind of detailing that, I then imagine what it means to run the risk of either projecting or imposing, because of that kind of surface level stuff, and then the manipulation, it tends to come through, and some of the ways in which we kind of experience that kind of weaponizing is, I will go for therapy if which then is, you don't have an awareness of yourself. There's no reflexivity that happens. There's always you're the problem. And I mean, we hear it all the time where it's like, we're here, but I think she needs it more than I do, or I think he needs it more than I do. And it's like, when you relate, there is no one who takes a position of being more empowered than the other. So as best as possible, if we're saying we want to seek out insight and awareness and knowledge, it means we are both admitting, coming into therapeutic spaces or safe spaces, that the work doesn't end. And as best as possible, we need to level the playing field. So that we understand action, reaction, so that we understand internal condition being the thing we have to work on deliberately, intentionally, so that people experience you in a particular way. But if you are distancing, the first thing that we think about as psychologists is, why are you resistant? So now we kind of go back to the person who's seeing other people as needing more help, like,
what's going on with you?
Of course, what makes you think you've kind of elevated significantly to a place where you are well rooted and well grounded, yet that is continuous work, that deep diving that you spoke about. That happens until you transition. Every single day.
I'd like to give an example, because I think you make a very relatable point, right? So one kind of typical example you can find is someone, a couple coming into therapy. There's one partner who's emotionally closed off and resistant, and never has the problem in the relationship. I'm always good, I don't have issues. It's my partner who doesn't like the fact that I don't get dramatic or temperamental or dwell on problems or go back to revisit problems. And so in that kind of situation, you always find that the one who is more sensitive to the conflict in the relationship, and is the one who's more expressive or forced to be expressive in that dynamic is usually the one who needs this more than than me in the couple, right? And so what we're here to do is I'm going to sit here while we work on the problematic partner. And you feel that resistance when you try and kind of check in, like, what's going on with you? Well, I don't have any problem. I'm good. That is a kind of really clear example of therapy being weaponized, right? You agree that, okay, we're going to therapy, and then you get there, and I don't have a problem.
Yes.
I'm here to babysit while you work on the partner who does have the problem, the partner who, in this bi-directional dynamic, is forced to be the one who expresses all the conflict that's happening in the connection between the two. So that kind of passive aggressiveness, I think, is what we're really talking about, of like getting into the space that is meant for the development of both of you, or yourself, or your family, if it's a family therapy situation, and being the one to just be like, I will be immune or resistant to all of the influences of the space.
Absolutely. And I suppose as you speak of that, I'm also thinking about all the diverse aspects of the work that we do. Adolescent work. With parents. Oh my goodness. If there is a social cluster where we see that kind of ultimatum, weaponizing, imposing, they are the problem, not it's with parents and their teenagers.
Yeah. Parents and their children, period. If we're being 100% honest.
But I mean teenagers, because that's when, teenagers start to push back. So then parents feel like I don't have the capacity, because teenagers, I'm finding, are very, very emotive. They have the language, they have the awareness, they've been exposed to your social media, broad media that's speaking about mental health. So when they come to frame their own internal condition, they actually know what they're talking about. But when they push it back to the parent for accountability, the parent is like, I don't know what you're talking about, maybe let's find you a therapist. And then when you're kind of running through the intake, all that you hear is, I don't have the emotional capacity for this. I'm bringing her here, or I'm bringing him here, so that we work deal with it. And then when, of course, we prioritize the confidentiality in the space, and encourage that our clients would be the ones that bring in whosoever they want to bring in into interventions and all of that. But when you kind of sit and think through what's coming up, and a lot of it is calling for the other person to put themselves within the matrix of what's happening, parents are just like, nah, maybe this is not beneficial. Maybe this is not working. Maybe they're not ready. I don't think the child is ready for therapy. Yet it's really about what they are sitting with. Okay, great, Bui and Boledi, we hear you. But what does it mean for us to have an awareness that a person is ready, or that I am ready to start the process? And I suppose this segment will be looking at, the stages of change model, which is what we typically use across industries, across disciplines, to see where a person is at. And I suppose even when we have that very first session, this is what we're trying to place them at. Do they have an awareness of this? What are their therapeutic goals? Do they have a sense of realizing that in as much as they exist with others and other people have an impact on them, they also play a significant role in the progression of their own lives. And I suppose whilst we're having this conversation about change, we'll also have a conversation about accountability. And what does it mean really to break down the defenses that one might have coming into a space? Remember, psychology or coming into therapy is it's very exposing. Clients have used expressions like, I left here feeling overwhelmed, or I left here feeling lighter, or I left here feeling bare, or it's one of those things where even when people might want to conceal things.
Mm-hmm.
They come, they look at you, you look at each other. There's a moment where you're both exchanging a gaze, and they're like, okay, if I'm being honest, okay, because there's kind of that space that also allows them to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
So, as you're speaking, I'm thinking one of the first things, it's not always something you can kind of preempt, right? But it matters the kind of context in which therapy is introduced, right? So I think we call it the Hail Mary when therapy is being brought up in, especially in the space. Well, it can happen in like a partnership, right, with couples, but it can also be something at work where it's just like this is the final straw type of thing. So that kind of being backed into therapy already brings people into the space quite defended, right, quite on guard, because it's already coming up in a very triggered kind of context, right? And then we're talking about how, well, therapy does a little bit more triggering, right? It brings up things you're not expecting, and you never really know what the process will expose. And so there's that added extra kind of guardedness. So if there's ever a way to kind of preempt that, especially talking to couples here, don't wait until you're at the brink of just breaking up. I think sometimes we think of therapy as a place that you only go when something needs repairing, but therapy is also about relationship maintenance. It's about the maintenance of your own self-development, and having and prioritizing a space where you go here for healing, you go here for reflection. So if that's a possibility, that's I think the best kind of way to kind of walk into the space of therapy with a consciousness of what you're coming here to do, and not kind of find yourself being dragged or triggered by this space because it came up in a time of conflict or real fear about what are the next steps of my life or this relationship. It's so hard. How do you tell someone to not be defended, right? And this is coming from a therapist, right? Like, sure. Because, okay, you're here now. You're in therapy. You're sitting in front of the therapist, right? You said yes to your partner or your boss or your family member. Not really willingly, right? You said it because in the moment, that's the thing that was going to give you a little extra time.
Yeah, get out of jail free card.
To figure out something really. But I want to say that, well, we always say that therapy is intended to be a safe space, a space for reflection, a space for that. So hold that in mind when you're in that space, right? There's always this kind of fear that, especially in couples work, that the therapist is just going to be on the side of whoever seems more wrong or more troubled or more emotional. But really the therapist is there, not even for you as individuals, although that's important, right? The therapist is there to repair the connection between the two of you or support you in that. So it's never really about who's wrong or who's right. And I think you're saying this, there isn't one person who's more empowered, right? The fact that you're both, and this is for couples, in therapy means it's something about the way you guys come together, that meeting point that needs repair. Yes, that does have consequences for like what is your own individual work that you need to do. But I want to say surrender to the space. Once you're in the space of therapy, that's the kind of the place to stop fighting. I want to say acknowledge that you're in the space because something needs repair, right? No one really ends up in therapy by accident or because everything is going absolutely great in their life. So there's a reason that you're there. Make use of the resource that's around you, in front of you. So those are my 2 cents.
You know what? I think anyone who's listening, even myself in the room, I'm sitting and I'm thinking around. At the end of the day, we really want to maintain healing spaces for what they are. And if it means we need to restore the dignity of that, let it be that we do that. And if in any way we've kind of shifted even our own focus as practitioners to playing referee in spaces or being the voice piece for people and individuals, then it means we need to also interrogate and introspect in which ways are we not enabling that kind of sense of therapy being weaponized or the psychological experience being weaponized. And I suppose we also have a very complicated history with access to mental health care and what that means, and that's a story for another day. So I suppose the kind of responsibilities for the person coming into the space, but also we know that there are practitioners listening to this podcast. There is a need to go back and really interrogate, and I think that's why we always speak about transference and counter-transference, so that we don't find ourselves consciously or unconsciously tapping into ways that start to deepen that kind of weaponizing in the space as well.
Yeah. I want to add to that and say I think the important thing here, and if we're talking to other practitioners, is doing the work of, well, we're talking about buy-in, right, as the kind of critical factor for countering weaponizing therapy or using it for something it's not intended for. But for therapists to also do the work of really getting true consent from both or whoever's in the therapy, right? So if it's an employee who's been sent by work, okay, you maybe seen their file, or you find out in that first 10-20 minutes that this is what they're here for, right? And you can read the resistance on somebody. You can tell that they're just like, I'm just gonna go with the flow, and
or sometimes they're even anxious. You can literally tell that the anxiety is what's propelling them forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about really taking the time to settle them, help them understand that at the end of the day, there's nothing that's going to happen in this space that they don't give full body consent to, which means beyond just the verbal yes, but also reading their body language for, okay, this person's really in this now, and that's the same for partners as well, like couples who are considering therapy together. Sometimes that work gets done in the first couple of sessions of the therapy with the therapist, right? As in, before we start to dive into relationship problems, let's first get everyone on the same page about, okay, we're actually doing this now. But again, if you are having that conversation at home as a couple or as a family, not just forcing therapy on someone. I hate to say it like that, but like you know a yes that's like a real yes, and you know a yes that's like they're just saying it so that I can get my way.
And there's also a yes where you hope the person will be inspired in the process to actually seek change.
We'll take that yes as well, at least that is like we can work with that.
Of course.
But where someone is just saying yes because they want to shut down the conversation, you can also, maybe that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still go and try, but you can expect that when they get there, they won't really fully be in it, and there'll be some work needed to kind of get everyone's buy-in, because the work can't happen, and this is especially where in the therapy room it's more than you and the therapist. It's as a couple, for example, or family members. The work can't really happen until everyone has given their embodied full yes, I'm in it, I'm doing it, I'm here to work, even if it's hard for me.
So I suppose then the kind of ways that we're then hoping to bring up in a psychoeducative manner is understanding the stages of change. so that you also appreciate in the conversations leading up to help, help seeking, where a person is at. And I suppose one of the things that becomes very important about the model is that there's a sense of it being cyclic. So it's not, it doesn't happen in this particular order that it's truly, engaged in. It can take different forms. And for us, I suppose it just becomes quite important, because we also see it, you'll hear when we go through it, where, you get to a particular point and level, and a client regresses, or, is suppressing other things, or other things are coming up that are kind of hindering their commitment to change. And also the appreciation that a lot of processes are happening all at the same time as well. So you might be here in therapy for personal development, but occupational stuff is coming up and relational stuff is coming up. So with the stages of change, there are about 6 of these. So the first one becomes pre-contemplation, and the understanding here is that you're not yet acknowledging that there is problematic behavior that needs to be changed. I think many relationships, we butt heads at this point, where it's like, I'm feeling this, you're feeling that, I'm feeling misunderstood, you don't get me, why won't you realize this? And there's a lot of resistance and a lot of defensiveness here, because if the other person has not perceived it, you cannot be their sight. It's one of those things where it drains you, it saps your energy trying to really get a person to see things the way that you do. And sometimes you find that when we're thinking about who needs the therapy the most, we actually need to help the person doing the inquiry to say, I don't think the person's actually open to this. Simply because you are the one who's gained insight, they haven't.
I think it's also, and this is just a side note, right, that it's also from this awareness of pre-contemplation, because it's almost like a unknowing, like I don't know, right? And sometimes people like to use that as a way to gaslight folks. Like you see the thing, but you don't want to acknowledge that you see it. Just a kind of two-piece to keep aware of, not obviously to accuse people of gaslighting. But I think at least when we're thinking about that as a concept, people may weaponize that pre-contemplation phase.
And then we've got contemplation, which is acknowledging that there is a problem, but one might not be ready or sure of wanting to make a change. Preparation or determination is getting ready to change. I think a lot of people who pick up the phone, send an email asking about therapy are at the preparation stage. Action or willpower, which is changing behavior. We struggle to get people to move from I know to this is what I'm going to do about it.
I might even take it back a little bit and say that the preparation phase is really discussing with your partner that this is what I think we need to do, this is what I think we need to kind of approach. And then that what's the second one? The change phase.
So it's pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and action.
Action is a combination of actually getting to the point of making the call to set the appointment, and then obviously getting into the therapy. Because how often have you asked clients like, what? Obviously this problem has been going on for a while. Why now? What is it about now that was like, okay, I have to make that call, I have to take that step of action? Sometimes it's circumstances that force people. It's like, what else can I do? And so they take that step of action even before they're fully prepared.
Like you said, I think that adds quite a diverse way of kind of thinking about it. And I suppose, the next part then becomes maintenance, right? So maintaining this kind of behavior change. And I suppose that's the thing that, we would most likely frame as being empowered, coming into insight, coming into deeper awareness. and you've kind of engaged some of the ways in which how do we perceive the next person, how do we perceive ourselves, and all of that. And then the last one becomes relapse. And it's so profound that it's actually still placed within stages of change. And it does have that appreciation that things tend to cycle. But also that when a person comes to a place of relapse, they need to give themselves the grace to say that I can still move myself towards action and willpower. I can still move myself towards re-maintaining some of the things that I had committed in the space as well.
Relapse, we definitely see when people stop showing up for
course.
sessions.
When they ghost their therapist, please. We're also other women's children.
Please don't traumatize us. It hurts our feelings. Nobody loves a ghost. But maintenance is really about doing the work, I think, and being committed, I think. And there's like doing the work because you're just doing it, and then there's adding that layer of commitment, which really is where the real transformation is. I think I always tell clients that, well, you can come every day, but honestly, it's the commitment that you give to the work that will be the actual transformation.
Indeed.
And then I think relapse is so important to kind of foreground and let people know that not only is that coming, it's expected, but it's also part of the process of growing, right? Because relapse is a way to kind of reinforce the maintenance work. That relapse shows you where the gaps are and where you need to go back to kind of fill and reinforce whatever work you've been doing to maintain that change. And that just helps you grow more, expand more, and fortify the kind of work that you've been doing.
So I suppose then it becomes important to then encourage, the listener's awareness of this, because I think if you've weaponized therapy, then you stand at, on the sidelines or at the finish line to be like, well, surely this thing is not working. Why are we here again? And sometimes, therapy is not cheap. So it's one of those things where it's like, we spend so much money, and there's a sense of an irritability with the pace that a person is taking to get to that point of change.
If there's any encouragement to not kind of weaponize and become kind of passive aggressive in therapy, is come on, folks, like, it's expensive, this thing. Don't waste your own money.
Exactly. But also don't hang it above another person's head, because even when it comes to as we were speaking before this episode, we were talking about how people carry us home. Actually, so it's one of those things where the conversation, especially with couples, continues to happen in the car on your way home in the week until the next time that we meet. Other people kind of check in with the people around them. If it's HR, they want to know what the progress is. Can your psychologist write notes about how it's been going? So there's always a sense of continuance, and I suppose it shouldn't be a whole thing of, well, they said eight sessions. I don't see the change in 8 sessions. What was this for? Or it's almost the end of what we had contracted. There's still a lot of resistance. Therefore, let's introduce the punishment or the consequence. It defeats the purpose of understanding that for others, if you kind of get to a place in the dynamic of therapy where the defenses are so low that we then appreciate that your progress is equally my own in terms of that's the kind of vulnerability that we share in this space, then we've done successful work. But if it's that babysitting and that guiding and that, then you then as the person start to hold this grand sense or a judgmental sense of, well, you're stalling us. Well, they do say we're only as strong as the weakest link. You're the weakest link. There's just a lot of that, bashing happening in the space. But if we get to a point where we reason together, we understand that if we have to stop and rest here, introduce other forms of understanding. Let that be the process.
And especially with couples work, allowing each person in the space to have their own pace, right? I know that you're coming together as a couple, but you're also individuals who process differently. I want to highlight, I think, a really important point that you make, Bui, about just how therapy as a concept is weaponized. You know, we've been speaking around how people in the space kind of weaponize it, but also when we're thinking about how we start to fit therapy into our life dynamics and relationships, using it. So, you know, when we're talking about like the Hail Mary, for example, using it not as a placeholder for what you actually want to do in the end, right? So like, I actually do want to end this relationship, but I'm gonna let the therapy ride, and then I won't participate in it, and then I'm going to almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like knew it wasn't gonna work, just wanted to take it off the list, and now I can freely dump you if that's what I want to do. Or even with work, it's like, well, we're just kind of sending you here because it's protocol, and we're not really interested in your development or growth. But as soon as we have that in your records, we're free to. So those are also ways that in different spaces that therapy can be used as a weapon to achieve something.
Malice, yeah. Sure. I mean, we could spend all day unpacking this. I think it's quite multi-layered, but of course we're coming to the end of this session in terms of us talking about the weaponizing of therapy, and we really would encourage, that this is shared broadly, that there's interaction. Ask us whichever questions you have, carry the conversation forward. I think it becomes, we always think about all the ways in which gatekeeping happens in the profession. But, I think one of the other ways in which we start to think about that in the space itself is some of the weaponizing that we encounter. Thank you so much, Boledi, for your time. And thank you to the listeners for tuning into the Mental Root. This is the beginning of a very meaningful and great relationship and participation with Buyisile Mental Health Associates. My name is Buyisile Mncina, counselling psychologist, and thank you for tuning into the Mental Root.